Carol Ann, go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. Woo, there's a lot of people on this one. Okay, thank you and welcome. And today will be a little shorter than normal even. So first off, before I introduce our speaker, next lunch with a leader is kind of going to be dinner with a leader because we were going to have Deborah Blanche, and it will be in Zoom, of course. I may never get off of this, and you will get more information, but there will be no lunch with a leader, which would be on the 16th of September. But you will hear more about that later, and anyway, until you hear from me, so not a problem. Next, I am going to give you just a little bit of information, although most of you should have seen it in the reporter or the post or via email that I sent out several times, because I get compulsive about those things. But anyway, Amanda is the person who is the Watershed Monitoring and Technical Services manager. And she's been working, she worked at the lab and now she's working for N3B. So I don't think I need to go through a lot unless someone has a big question. She's going to talk, and she likes to do it sort of an interactive thing. So if you have a question, you can either put your face on and I can see it and we can do the hands, or you can, I'll get back on the chat and see who wants to talk and we can do that. And before we do that, because now you know the procedure, Kate Keenan, who's up here on my screen, I don't know where she is on yours, but she's right there. You want to wave a second, is going to actually do a little overview of this N3 project so that you kind of know where you're going. But since I see lots of names here of people I don't know, I bet you all know about this. So, but for those of us who don't, we're going to get a quick little PowerPointy thing here, and you can just listen as you wish. So does anyone have a question, or are you all set on this? Everybody good? Go, Kate. I'll go on my mute.
All right, thanks, Carol Ann. Can everybody hear me okay?
I think so.
Super. I'm just gonna.
Sometime, guys, people, I have a gallery view, but if you can't hear, I'm going to suggest, just speak up.
Okay, and you can see my screen okay, Carol Ann?
Perfect.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be with you today. Like Carol Ann mentioned, my name is Kate Keenan. I work with the Stakeholder Affairs Group at N3B. And I just wanted to give you a brief overview of N3B's work in general, so you have a sense of all the good work we're doing to address the environmental impacts from Lanol's historical operations. And then I'll hand it over to Amanda, and she'll get into the meat of the work her group is doing to monitor stormwater runoff at the lab. So this first slide just gives you an overview of the organizational structure of Los Alamos National Laboratory and kind of an N3B and how N3B fits into everything. And some of you may very likely be familiar with this organizational structure already, but just so everybody's on the same page, the Department of Energy, of course, has a very strong presence here in Los Alamos, in part through the National Nuclear Security Administration. They're a semi-autonomous branch of the Department of Energy, and they have field offices all across the country that oversee sites where defense-related nuclear research and weapons development is occurring, and that includes at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And then NNSA's field office is commonly referred to as NALA, and Triad, you see their name here, is the managing and operating contractor that oversees LANO's operations. LANO's primary areas of focus are its weapons program, global security, science, technology, and engineering. And then the DOE's other main presence in Los Alamos is through its environmental management office. The Office of Environmental Management oversees environmental cleanup at sites across the country where that defense-related nuclear research and weapons development has occurred before 1999, primarily during the Manhattan Project and the Cold War era. And we refer to that era as kind of the legacy era. Environmental management field offices also exist across the country to locally manage cleanup. And here in Los Alamos, that field office is referred to as EMLA. And this is where N3B fits in. We are EMLA's primary contractor for legacy environmental cleanup at LANO. And then you'll see here in yellow kind of the main areas of N3B's work, and I'll get into those in a little more detail on this next slide. So when we break it down, we like to talk about our work in these terms. We protect area water quality. And so we have a water program that has two main areas of focus. We have a groundwater program. They monitor area groundwater for contamination associated with historical Los Alamos National Laboratory operations. They are also treating a contaminant plume in the regional aquifer beneath the lab that has elevated levels of hexavalent chromium. And they're also investigating another contaminant plume in the regional aquifer below the lab that contains Royal Demolition Explosive, or RDX. The second area of focus for our water program is the surface water program, and that's Amanda's group. So she'll really be going into more detail on that. One of their main areas of focus is this extensive network they have of automated samplers that collect stormwater runoff after rain events. These samples show contaminants of concern that may be associated with historical LANO operations, and then Amanda's group determines if they need to build any structures or controls to mitigate that potential migration of contaminated stormwater. The second area of work that we focus on is shipping waste off-site. And this is waste that was generated at LANO during the Manhattan Project and Cold War era. It's primarily transuranic waste, low-level radiological waste, and hazardous waste. In addition to just shipping it off-site, in some cases we retrieve it and process it so it meets waste acceptance criteria at the appropriate disposal facility. And then the third area of N3B's focus is cleaning up the land. So we remediate sites across the entire LANO complex where solid waste was historically spilled or disposed, and that led to contaminated soil. And some of these sites are old landfills that are referred to as material disposal areas. And then other sites are smaller in nature. We're also decontaminating and demolishing facilities used in LANO's Cold War era plutonium processing and radiological liquid waste treatment operations. And this next slide is a visual of where all this work that I just mentioned is occurring. So the decontamination and demolishing of the facilities and the industrial waste lines that I just mentioned, that's happening here at TA 21, which is on DP Mesa. And then just down the road from that, at a site called Middle DP Road, which is a fairly high profile project. We're also investigating some parcels of land where a Los Alamos County contractor found some materials linked to historical laboratory operations. And so now N3B is out there doing a lot of excavation and investigations to ensure that radiologically contaminated materials are not found during future development. The material disposal areas that I mentioned, the large historical landfills, are kind of scattered throughout the laboratory complex. And I should have mentioned the lab's boundary is in red here. So you'll see the Mtds here in blue, and then the sites where there were historical spills or just disposal of waste, those are really all over the lab as well. And down here, the southern external boundary, we're doing a lot of work down here currently, cleaning up a significant amount of contaminated soil. The chromium plume that I mentioned, the hexavalent chromium plume, is located in groundwater beneath Morton-Dad Canyon, right there. And then the Royal Demolition Explosive, or RDX plume, is in groundwater beneath Cañón de Valle over here on the western boundary of the lab. That's the plume that we're currently investigating. And then we have groundwater monitoring sites and surface water monitoring sites, really just all over the place, and also at some sites outside the lab's boundary. And then lastly, the waste, the transuranic low-level radiological waste that I mentioned, that we're responsible for shipping off-site to permanent disposal facilities, that is stored right here at TA 54, which is off Highway 4. And yeah, I think that that covers it. So again, I just wanted to give you a very general overview of N3B's work before Amanda dives in. I know everybody is excited to hear from her about our work to monitor stormwater runoff at Lano. So I will hand it over to Carol Ann or to Amanda. And if anybody has questions about any of the projects that I mentioned, I would love to work with Carol Ann to get another subject matter expert to possibly do a presentation. So I know everybody's excited to hear from Amanda. So
before you escape, let me,
Yeah.
I have two questions. I'll give you one and then you can answer it, and then I'll give you the second one. Okay. So they wanted to know, what were the dimensions of this area on this map, is what I'm assuming they mean. Do you know the, whatever that is?
The dimensions of the area of the map?
Well, it says of this area, and I'm assuming they mean that map.
The mileage, like the square mileage of the work scope.
What? Amanda, do you know how many square miles?
Yeah, it's about 40 square miles is the laboratory proper, but there is some monitoring that's going on off the lab proper boundaries. So you can see up in the town site, we do some monitoring up there, but it's about, laboratory is about 40 square miles.
Okay, and what does MDA stand for?
MDA stands for Material Disposal Area. And those are, we have 7 of those that we're responsible for under our contract. And they are basically these old dump sites or historical landfills that the the lab used primarily during the Cold War era.
Okay, that's all I see. Whoops, somebody just chatted. 1 second. What did they find on the south side of DP Road on the senior center housing site that's going to be built?
You know, I would have to defer that question to one of the subject matter experts out at Middle DP Road. We do, and I'm not trying to, that's a great question. I'm not trying to skirt around an answer to it. We do have a website on Entry B Los Alamos's homepage that gives regular bi-weekly updates on what's going on at Middle DP Road. So you can find some updates there, but we are, you know, continuing to make progress out there and continuing to find materials that we're excavating and then sending off to be sampled. Like I said, just to ensure that no radiologically contaminated materials are found during future development of that site. But that if you're interested in more information on that project in particular, I'd be happy to work with you, Carol Ann, to
maybe you want
to
maybe you can type in the chat that website and people can look at that as well.
Yeah, sure.
And just do that. Sorry, something's made me cough. Here. So unless there's any other questions, gang, I'm going to go ahead and let Amanda begin. Are you okay, Amanda, on this? Okay.
Okay, can you see my screen? Are we good there? Okay.
Looks good. I think you're fine. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, my name's Amanda White, and I'm the program manager for Watershed Monitoring and Technical Services. So under this program, we do a whole lot of surface water monitoring, stormwater monitoring, as well as sediment monitoring across the laboratory. And today I'm going to talk about a particular permit. It's a very large portion of our work, which is the Mtds Stormwater Individual Permit. And so just a general background, it was issued in 2010, and it covers, you know, we have the mesa tops here where a lot of the legacy sites are, and then we also have the canyon bottoms. So this, in general, covers the sites that were on the mesa tops where a lot of the activities occurred. Now, some of them were in the canyons, and I'll get into a little bit of that shortly. So just wanted to give you a brief overview of what the individual permit is and what we'll be talking about in general. So these are topics today, and so I'm going to go through what is a SHMU or AOC. What do we mean when we say that? The solid waste management unit, or an area of concern. So it's translate that to a site that historically had some sort of solid waste associated with it. Area of concern is a little bit more of affected media. So, and how do we monitor stormwater runoff from a SHMU or AOC? I think of us, I use this analogy a lot. I think of us as the goalies. We're protecting, you know, anything that's running off of the SHMU or AOC stormwater-wise. We're trying to slow down any erosion that's going on, try to capture, retain any sediment. So that's our goal until we get the site cleaned up and we close it. So we're going to talk about remote telemetry units as well as precipitation, which you know, we collect stormwater runoff. So precipitation is highly linked to that and sample collection. And then what we do with the results of the monitoring and the samples. Once we collect them, we screen them to target action levels as per the permit, perform corrective actions if necessary, and report out. So we go through these these loops internally. Some sites are in their 4th or 5th loop. So we'll get into that shortly. So here we go. What's a SHMU or AOC? That's considered an IP site. So when I say site, I could mean either one. So the individual permit addresses potential pollutant sources from historical industrial activities at landfill sites to mitigate migration of contaminants through stormwater. And some of the sites are firing sites, landfills, outfall or drain lines, soil contamination, and others. So these are pictures of examples. So there's a mortar impact area, former drum storage area, a septic outfall, and a former surface disposal site. And IP sites are grouped into site monitoring areas and then further grouped into watersheds. So here's the watersheds. This is the laboratory proper. That map shows that boundary, that 40 square miles we were just talking about. And these are the watersheds. So starting from the north, that is Los Alamos Canyon watershed. It's a very big watershed. And then we've got Sandia, then going south here, then we've got Mtds, Pajarito, then Water, Chiquewi, Ancho, and then Chiquewi. And then down at the bottom is Bandelier National Park. So, and that's the Rio on the south east side there. So site monitoring areas, a site monitoring area, and I'm going to flip back just real quick. Okay, so a site monitoring area, you can see here at the bottom picture, that's a site monitoring area. It is basically a drainage area where you can see that dot, that blue dot at the bottom, that's where we sample the stormwater runoff. So in order to capture runoff from the SHMUs, there's 3 SHMUs in this picture. Quite often, you can see here actually that gray area at the bottom, that's a topography. So it's right on a cliffside, which makes it quite challenging to monitor based on the topography here, and the site conditions can be very challenging, and if it's and frankly unsafe for some activities. So we do the best we can to get a one-to-one relationship between SHMU and monitoring location, but quite sometimes we just can't do that. So I'm going to flip back. So that's an SMA, or site monitoring area, is a drainage area. We'll flip back here. So that's what we're showing here in this table in the lower left-hand corner. That's site monitoring areas summarized by watershed. And that's how we identify them. So for example, Los Alamos watershed would be LA. LA-SMA, site monitoring area, -1. That would be the first SHMU, SMA, excuse me, at the headwaters of LA Canyon, Los Alamos Canyon. So, and then you'll see, this will make sense later because I'll talk about PSMA2, and that's Pueblo SMA2, and that's the second SHMU going downstream, marching towards the Rio. So this is a summary of the number of site monitoring areas, SMAs, in each of the canyons. You can see we cover a lot of ground. You saw that in Kate's map as well. So, and high priority versus moderate priority sites in the 2010 permit was we identified sites that had a high possibility of PCBs being present. So, transformers were buried, something along those lines. It was a high probability, and thus they became high priority sites. So this is showing the high priority sites. Moderate priority basically is everything else. So the high priority had different timelines in the permit than the moderate priority. I will move on. So here's just how we sample. Monitoring protects water quality both on-site and off-site, and helps determine the effectiveness of stormwater controls. That's the goal of this permit, is to determine the effectiveness of our controls that we put in place to, again, slow down and potentially detain the water. So it's allowing those sediments and potential contaminants attached to them to settle out and remain on site. Stormwater discharges are collected from sites at specified sampling points. Notice we talked about this, site monitoring areas. And this was the relationship I was saying before. A single site to an SMA, that's one SHMU to one SMA. Then we have those multiple sites like this one shown in the picture where we can't always do a one-to-one relationship. So relocation of a sampling point has consequences per the permit, and it's considered an outfall location. So if you're familiar with Stormwater, the NPDS program, it's considered an outfall, so it has to be a permit modification to move those to a large extent from where they were initially in 2010 set. Minor adjustments based on, sometimes we perform corrective actions there. We build controls and we have to move them because we build a big earthen berm and we have to put the sampler downstream of that berm. So we have to move them in small increments. Okay, and sampling frequency. The initial sampling that was performed, we collected 2 or more confirmation samples during each of at least 2 separate measurable storm events occurring at least 15 days apart. This is language directly out of the permit. So that was between 2010 and 2011. And we're still in that phase for some of our sites because, frankly, there's a lot of vegetation. They're very flat. Some of them, they're again on the mesa tops. You can imagine some of them. There's a whole lot of vegetation naturally occurring. They just don't flow, and they didn't even flow during that huge 1,000-year return period storm event in 2013. So, we do have issues collecting samples, but we still make sure everything's turned on, active, and ready to go. So, some of our once we get out of the initial sampling event, we collect 2 samples, and then we go to what we call extended baseline sampling, where 1 confirmation sample is collected during 1 measurable storm event for SMA, site monitoring areas, with no sample collection during the initial sampling. So that's what I was talking about. Those are the ones that are in the extended phase. And then we have corrective action monitoring. So that's after a control measure was installed. So that'll start us on the do loop. So the loop is we installed baseline controls in 2010 through 2011. We were required for the permit to have basic controls, stormwater controls installed, and we did. And so once after that, we collect stormwater samples, screen them if they exceed any TALs, and we move into a phase where of corrective action. So we determine what's going on at the site, why are we exceeding. It can get a little complex, but and then we perform our corrective actions, and then we restart the sampler, and then we go again. We sample, we see if anything exceeds TALs. If it does, we build something different. We perform more corrective action. So again, some of them are in the 4th, I think even 5th loop of that. Okay, so pollutants of concern, what do we sample for? Oh, what's up?
Did you already say what, well, you got it on your slide here, what TAL stands for?
I was going here.
Okay. I just thought
so, sure.
And
we screen the data.
And there's one question from Dorothy. Are there EPA standards that guide actions following the sampling?
So the standards are actually the TALs here. TALs are based on the New Mexico water quality criteria for subject pollutants. So they are, some of them are based on EPA, but a huge majority of them are from New Mexico. Only cases if we didn't have one, they use the EPA standard. So we do use New Mexico water quality standards. By the way, this is an EPA, that's a good question, because this is an EPA issued permit, not a state. The feds have primacy over this permit, not the state, but the state has a process where they do assert and certify the permit. So they use the New Mexico water quality standards. And then guiding actions after sampling, that's what we'll get into more detail here. So yes, TALs are screening levels. They're established in IP as benchmarks to determine the effectiveness of control measures implemented to meet the non-numeric technology-based effluent limitations. That's a mouthful. But that is what we are doing here. These are not necessarily effluent limits. The BMPs are the goal, and then we sample in order to determine the effectiveness of the BMP, of retaining and slowing erosion and maintaining that contamination on site. So, and again, the TALs are based on the New Mexico water quality criteria. Results are based on validated analytical data from samples sent to a third-party laboratory. And site inspections are conducted after we have a TAL exceedance. So again, we collect the sample, we screen it to the TAL, and we call it a TAL exceedance if it exceeds. And then the screening process begins to initiate corrective action. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right, so I'm going to get into now how we collect samples. There we go. So this is our summer precipitation network. You can see we have Met towers that are run by Triad, the laboratory. And then we have our own extended network of precipitation gauges. And those are the darker blue points there. And the black is the lab boundary, got the major roads and elevation. But in purple, those teeny little dots are all of our SMA samplers. So we have, there are 250 SMAs on our permit. And we have, right now, because of the phases I was talking about previously, we have different SMAs in different phases of the permit. So right now we are actively monitoring 135 of those 250 locations. Now the other ones were already sampled. They're already in different phases where either we're performing corrective actions, we performed corrective actions. There is a certificate of completion from the RCRA side of the house that it was cleaned up. So there's a lot of different phases that we're in, but actively monitoring, we have 135 SMAs. And those you'll get to see them in a minute, the samplers, the automated samplers. So how do we tell if it collected water? So in the past, what we've done is anytime we had a precipitation exceedance, so in the permit, there are requirements for if you have a greater than 0.25 inches 30-minute storm event measured at these locations, these rain gauges, you will have to go inspect any of the controls, stormwater controls installed at the locations associated with it. So those summer Thiessen polygons, if your rain gauge exceeds that threshold, then you have to go inspect all of the SMAs associated with it, and all the BMPs associated with it. And so that still stands. That's how we inspect the BMP. Sorry, best management practices equals stormwater controls. I might say, I use them interchangeably, but best management practices, stormwater controls are fairly synonymous. So we have to go inspect all of those. Now, we also use the gauge network, the precipitation gauge network, to inform whether a sampler collected or not. But that was a bit of a guessing game. So, and you can think of, that was a lot of samplers to inspect. So, and a lot of times we came up empty looking for samples. Quite often we would find them, of course, we found quite a few, but often we'd come up empty. So we wanted to really refine this. And so I won't go over the winter, but I'll show you our remote telemetry units that we developed. So this is an ISCO. That gray barrel looking thing at the bottom is where there's bottles inside there in a round carousel and an arm, that distributor arm that samples, and a tubing connected to it. So it samples, puts the water in the bottle, rotates around, and when it and when it detects water, it goes. So there's a brain associated with that, and that's the sort of box on the top of it. That's the brain of the ISCO. So you can an ISCO is the automated sampler company that makes it, is ISCO. And so you can program these in many ways. So there's a computer attached to it. But on the back of that, you can see there now inside, you can look at the electronic panel, is associated with something we call our remote telemetry unit. So that gray box on the back that's opened up, attached to the ISCO, or automated sampler, is our remote telemetry unit. And that is hooked up to the sampler, and it gives, whenever it samples, it gives a signal to our unit, and there's an antenna as well that says, hey, I sampled. So we can really target now where we have sampled so that we can get them out of the field more quickly as well, because a lot of water quality samples and water samples have hold time requirements and preservation requirements for them. So it's imperative that we try and get them out of the field quickly. And this is how we do it. And so I'll show you some of the RTUs in the field. This is a remote telemetry unit. This is a repeater station up at the top on the left is a repeater station way up on the top of Power Redoubt. So this allows all of the little remote telemetry units, uses a mesh technology, mesh network technology. It was actually developed by Triad in the remote sensing physics group. So they use it for different applications, but we worked with them to develop it for us. And so this is pretty cool, I think. And you can see our folks out in the field looking at the RTUs and the repeaters. And so this has really allowed us to, we know when a sampler collected a sample, and it shoots the information directly into our, where we sit, right in front of our computers. So I'll show you that now. This is the graphical user interface. So this is a map showing, okay, so those green areas are, those green little dots are samplers that are good to go. They're doing great. Their battery voltage is good. This is all on solar, by the way. All of our, just because they're in a very much remote locations, most of it's solar. For us, it's all solar, actually. Groundwater is not, but ours is all solar. And so we have 150 locations right now with monitoring alarms. And like I said, it's a mesh self-healing network. So that's complicated, but it's what it does is it uses, when you're way deep in the canyon, it's hard to get a radio signal out. You guys, you can barely get a cell phone signal out of the canyons, right? So what it does is it ping pongs to the other SMAs, the signal, and then it gets it, when it finally can get it out of the canyon, it gets it up and on top of the mountain, and then shoots the radio signal into our computers. And this is what we see. And it's great because we can see the battery voltage as well as did it collect a sample. So we have alarms that are triggered. And so every morning, bright and early, we can come in, especially after a rain event, see if anything collected and go collect the water and get it processed and get it to the laboratory. So that red dot there in the middle is showing that, we have a problem. And perhaps, it collected, well, the yellow is the battery voltage is going low. A green is everything's good with battery voltage. Red is it's below a certain threshold. You need to go replace it. Blue, which is not on here, is that we collected a sample. So we've talked about precipitation quite a bit and how it impacts. We use the network, and I just wanted to show you some data of precipitation over the past year since 2000. And this is over the laboratory. This is from the Met Tower data, because we also include winter in this. They have heated buckets, so we actually turn our network off over the winter. Our tipping buckets are sensitive to ice, and more to the point, we can't, in the permit, we cannot sample snow melt. and there's a reason for that. Snowmelt is generally, as you know, is slow moving. Stormwater runoff is not. So stormwater runoff is more likely to have, generally speaking, sediment entrained in it, and that's where a lot of the contaminants are attached to the sediment for various reasons. And so that's why snowmelt, generally Mtds permits, they don't want you collecting snowmelt. So however, we rely on the Met Tower network over the winter because that stormwater control inspection requirement occurs also, it also applies during the winter. So if we have a rain event in the winter, which does happen, and it's unfortunately happening more, I believe, feels like it, we have to go inspect all of the stormwater controls. So in general, you guys know, are well aware we were in a serious drought in 2020, and you can see it's really started in 2018, 2019, 2020 timeframe. So 2020 was when it shifted into exceptional drought, and we collected, you know, even in our droughty years in 2018, 2019, we collected, you know, 12 samples, 15 samples. In 2020, we collected 1. And, you know, everything was operational, functioning. We were doing everything we could. It was, yes, COVID did happen, but we were able to get back to work and out in the field, operational, come June. And so mid-June, we were given the green light to back in the field. And so it as far as our stormwater is concerned, there was no impact to the IP as far as samples. So you'll see we are the 2021 here, by the way, just as an aside, that last little notch was only as of May. So I was going to try and update it for August. We just didn't have time. So this year, as you guys know, we've been getting rain, so that's exciting. I'm really anxious to see how we're doing. But just keep in mind, it was a serious, hardcore drought, and you know, even though it's been raining, it's not doing a whole lot to remedy the reservoir issues and depletion and some of the groundwater problems. So let's see. So we're going to move into now stormwater monitoring results. So in 2018 to 2019, these are the IP results for different analytes, and the exceedance ratio. This is a lot to swallow here. It's the result divided by the screening level. So anything above 1 is showing that it was above our screening level or our TAL. Anything below that is not. So it did not exceed the TAL or the benchmark screening level. So you can see here and I know it's a little tiny, so I'll help you out. So we have aluminum, copper, gross alpha, hexachlorobenzene, lead, mercury, radium, RDX, selenium, silver, and PCBs and zinc. So a lot of that we'll talk about here shortly, but some of this is related to what's naturally occurring in the rocks around Los Alamos. We have a lot of aluminum in this that's naturally occurring in the Jemez and on the Pajarito Plateau. And we also have uranium and some of its daughter products naturally occurring, and we also have some of the fallout components. And there are anthropogenic related constituents. Anthropogenic, they're the fact that humans have built buildings and different building components, release different types of constituents and pollutants. And let's see, copper. Copper is in brake pads. Zinc is associated with any corrugated metal. So there's things like that. PCBs is a tricky one, and I'll talk about it in just a little bit. But so this is a box plot And I just really quickly, for anybody that isn't familiar, the top of the box is the 75th percentile. The middle, that line through the box, is the median. The bottom is the 25th percentile. Those lines, they're called whiskers, coming up and down from there, show any of the outlier data. And those little dots at the top are the 5th percentile, 95th percentile, and the one at the bottom, those dots, is the 5th percentile of the data. So it's showing a nice statistical distribution of the data. So you can see, you know, because this is a summary of a lot of data over time. Okay, so this, I'll just go back and forth here. This is the 2010 to 2018. This is showing all the data together. Then I wanted to plot the 2019 results on top of it. And just to reiterate one more time, we only had one sample in 2020, and it exceeded just gross alpha. So yeah, and it actually has a certificate of completion. So this is the 2019 IP results on top of it. So you can see those little red triangles. I'll flip back and forth one more time. So those little red triangles show that most of our data was in the realm of the previously collected data. And there's a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, you know, they're like PCBs, for example, we have had a pretty high result. But and oh, I did want to say one more time, one more thing. So what do the colors mean? So the green is a tau. There's different types of tau. So that's the average tau. And remember, I told you it was based on the water quality standards. So there's different types of New Mexico surface water quality standards, and the A tau is average. And so that's really more, we would average the two confirmation results together, do a geomean, and then that is really linked to the chronic aquatic life criteria. And then the M tau is the maximum target action level, and that's linked to an acute dose, so maximum, and that is linked to the acute aquatic life criteria. But suffice to say that so the maximum would just be one sample compared to the M tau. The average, the A tau, is 2. And MQL is maximum quantifiable limit, and that's related to the lab method. So it's a little bit of, it's a whole lot of information on the side, but just keep in mind that anything above that 1 is considered an exceedance and drives something to be done, a corrective action. So summary of IP results from 2019. We have aluminum, radium, and selenium, and we talked about some of that previously. That was highly related to the geology in the area. Gross alpha is geology as well as site related. You know, this was nuclear materials they were handling here. Copper and zinc are urban areas, highly urban areas. You know, when we developed our SMA drainage boundaries, again, we have site conditions that, you know, sometimes we have to capture runoff from a parking lot in order to capture all the stormwater runoff from a SHMU. So parking lots have a lot of copper because of the brake pad issue. So that's when the signal gets mixed as well as with the natural geology. But there is definitively site-related copper and zinc contamination. Let's see, mercury and arsenic are site-related. And in 2020, only one sample was collected. So results do not represent contaminant spread over LANL. Total PCBs are associated with humans. It's in the atmosphere, it's in the precipitation, and it's in the stormwater runoff. And it's definitively site-related. There's transformers buried, various assorted things like that across the lab. So we have, you know, they've detected PCBs in many remote locations, unfortunately. So it is, you know, throughout the world, almost akin to fallout. So it's a complex signal and a complex problem. Okay, so that's the stormwater results. I'm going to move into what we do now once we get more of the control measures, so the corrective actions. So again, there's this mouthful, non-numeric technology-based effluent limits. So that's referring to, the technology we're referring to there is the stormwater controls. So that's what we're implementing, and it's not numeric because it's actually a physical straw wattle or a seed and mulch or riprap or things like that. I'll show you pictures in a minute. So we have erosion and sediment control measures. We also manage run on to the SHMU as well as run off from the SHMU. We do employee training that's required for the permits and eliminate any unauthorized discharges. And we have other controls to eliminate waste and garbage, minimize generation of dust, minimize introduction of raw, final, or waste material, and flow velocity dissipation devices, which we do deploy occasionally. Installation, maintenance, baseline control measures were installed and certified by May 1, 2011. Remember, the permit came in 2010, towards the end of 2010, and then we had to install all of our baseline control measures by May 1st. So we did, and then additional control measures can be installed to address changed site conditions and to address maintenance issues with baseline or something called enhanced control. So enhanced control measures are installed as part of the corrective action pathway. So those are, we start with the baseline, and then, like I was saying, if we exceed, we do enhanced controls. We build enhanced controls. See. Okay, here's some examples of those baseline or additional controls. There's the straw wattle. You can see here. I'm going to use my mouse. Can you see that? The straw wattle is here. There's an earthen berm over here. We have seed and mulch that we applied in here. We have riprap. That's a spillway here for the earthen berm. And then we have vegetation. There's naturally occurring vegetation downstream as well as up. So vegetation does an amazing job of capturing runoff and slowing down runoff and capturing sediment as well. So that's the baseline. Maintaining, we have to inspect our controls as well as maintain them. So you can imagine the intensity of the stormwater here can cause issues. So control measures must be kept in effective operating conditions at all times per the permit. Failure to do so is a violation of the permit. So whenever possible, repairs or maintenance are performed and documented during inspection. If follow-up maintenance is needed, backup control measures must be installed. So if something is going to take a little bit of time to fix, we go out and we install something akin to baseline controls until we can get some heavy equipment in there to fix it. Doesn't happen too often, but occasionally, like in 2013, I don't know if you guys remember that 1,000-year return period storm. So we have to do that until maintenance is completed. Procedures and a maintenance schedule for all controls must be maintained, and if controls are not operating effectively, they must be repaired or replaced prior to the next storm event or as soon as practicable. So this is an example of before controls were installed. You can see here we have a swale and we have lots of little erosion features going on through here. This was during the construction. This was after. So they lined the swale or the channel and installed a check dam. That's a rock check dam. So it's checking the stormwater control. So making sure, checking the velocity of it, making sure it's not whipping down the channel and causing lots of erosion. And this was installed probably because they're going around a corner, a bend here, to slow it down before it, so it doesn't start eroding. Sorry, I'm using the wrong screen. This is the check dam. And there's the corner. And so make sure it stays on the pathway. And then you can see other rock check dams down the stream there. Okay, so and the need for corrective action is triggered by validated analytical sampling data that exceed one or more applicable TALs, or target action levels, screening levels. Screening is performed to determine the appropriate corrective action pathway and the most practical implementation. Enhanced controls, total retention, no exposure, and relying on the consent order, investigation, and remediation activities are some of the pathways for corrective action. So each of these are a little different. Let's see, here's some examples. So this is a beautiful example. These are rock berms installed below. You can see that I'm using the wrong screen again. These are rock berms. And you can see there's the spillway up there coming off. The stormwater runoff will come off the road. And we wanted to make sure we put mulch in between. These are rock berms, slowing it down. Basically, big rock check dams. Here we've got earthen berms. You can see them here, 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 and here. These are spillways to allow water, because when water gets to a certain level, it really needs, you need to tell it where to go, else it will tell itself where to go and erode out your beautifully constructed earthen berm. So that's what a spillway helps with. Here we've got earthen berms in series. We really like to do things in series because they help incrementally slow down the water. So you know, it's rather than one huge control, we often build things in series to slow it down, and really slow it down. This is a big area. This is one of the larger earthen berms that we built, and you can see they're constructing. The spillway is there at the end. Let's see, this is a retention wall with a spillway, and the samplers are usually the intake of the sampler. That's where we collect the sample, is usually at the top of the spillway, placed there after we construct. That's why we make those minor modifications to where the sampler is located. Here we got a big berm. Here, this is near Ottawee, the Ottawee building, if you're familiar with the area. So back, you can look at back behind. This is the parking garage, the Ottawee parking garage, and there's this great retention basin here, and it's got a French drain installed. So when water collects in there, the drain allows it to settle out. And this is there wasn't a whole lot of area to build anything in, and that's a lot of impervious area, as you might imagine, upstream. So this was a great improvisation and improvement on some of the larger berms that we build. So that was great. And then we have a retention wall. This is a retention wall. So these, generally speaking, the retention-based walls are associated with, this one's, I believe, a firing area. So we want to protect that slope upstream. Okay, so summary of enhanced controls built in 2020. We had plunge pools, and those are those pools I was talking about in series that we build, and rock check dams, wattles, and erosion control mat aprons, and a rock berm. Erosion control mat aprons just make sure it doesn't erode, if you tell from the erosion control. We have compost best management practices, or that we installed. Those are interesting because it's a new way, a new type of wattle that is made from compost, and it can help rather than just straw. Its compost can help absorb more of the heavy metals and even potentially organics. So it's a new technique, a new way of designing stormwater controls. So rather than just slowing things down, it could potentially absorb some of the contaminants onto the materials. Then we have a sediment basin, so that, and it's, what we decide to put where is very much dependent on multiple factors, but a lot of it has to do with site conditions as well as the exceedance level. So, and the which analyte exceeded. So, for example, aluminum is a tricky one because it really is associated with the geology. So, building a control to stop the naturally occurring contaminants, naturally occurring constituents. They're going to just pick them right back up once you go downstream. So that's a challenge. This is a specific example of what we built in 2020. It's PSMA 2.2. So that's Pueblo Canyon, site monitoring area 2.2. So it's not at the headwaters, it's further down. It was a former community wastewater treatment plant operated from 1948 to 1961. It was located in Los Alamos town site near Sombrio and Aspen Ridge above Graduation Canyon. Plant was decommissioned in 1961, transferred intact but out of service to LA County in 1967, and of a volunteer cleanup activity in 1999 and 2000, removed a portion of the process pipelines and a pump house. Treatment plant tanks were emptied, then completely or partially collapsed, filled, and buried by the county. Before I dive in here, it looks like there's a lot of chat. I'm gonna just scroll back up, sorry. Ooh, I missed a lot. Federal government, yes, federal government. I'm going to Roxanne Pacheco's question. Federal government has control over this permit, but federal EPA guidelines are not used. Yes, the state water quality standards are generally considered, I wouldn't use the word robust in the federal ones, but they're applicable to New Mexico streams. So the EPA, that's why they have the certification process. While the New Mexico Environment Department does not manage this, they have a huge hand in this permit. And in any other state, the state water quality standards are what's the most applicable. And they, generally speaking, adopt the EPA standards. With some exceptions, some states have issues of their own with their local geology and things like that. So they adopt site-specific water quality criteria. So I wouldn't say more robust, but definitely more applicable and site-specific. What are the dimensions of these items? I think we're talking about. I think we were talking about controlled. So we can look at the RTUs. Okay. Okay. Well, I think I actually call them R2D2s. I don't know if anybody's a Star Wars fan out there, but it's about that size. So I could put my arms around it. It's about that big. So it's portable. There are definitely heavy water in them, but they're about that big. For the ones that are both urban and site related, how do they compare in size? Gosh, you know, SMAs are all over the map, but generally speaking, the drainage areas are very, very small. We try to keep them as small as possible to capture just the runoff from the SHMU. So a lot of them are like 0.01 acres, so tiny. And some of them are big because, for example, historical firing sites were large, you know, and there's a SHMU, it's air release area from a coal-fired power plant. So that is a larger area. So sometimes it depends on the size of the SHMU, but generally speaking, most of them are the drainage areas are small. How do you think climate change, specifically a continuing drought in New Mexico and high potential for wildfires, followed by mudslides, will affect NJB's various projects in the Llano region? Oh, that's a big question. Sure. Well, you know, what they're predicting with climate change is the drought, but the biggest thing that we're addressing right now is the intensity of the storms is increasing. So we still do what we do, but it's becoming, well, with last year, a serious exception. We still had rain events last year, I know a lot of people felt like it didn't rain the entire summer, felt like that, but we did have rain events, and they were very intense rain events that did occur. So that's predicted to happen, more frequent, intense rain events with drought periods. So that's going to impact us. We'll just keep inspecting, and probably more inspections in the future. And if I had to guess, more maintenance of our controls. The wildfires, we tackled that, back in the Los Conchas, as well as the Cerro Grande. For those of you here in 2000, I was not working here then. I was working during the Las Conchas fire, and it was not good. There was a lot of our equipment was swept away, but we rebuilt everything, and everything's back really in a stable state. So I just hope that will be few and far between. I can't really speak to, I don't really see it impacting groundwater too much, unless it's continued drought, and that's a whole nother topic of water. Does your work only monitor runoff from soil or contamination, or does it also monitor contaminants in current water discharge? So yeah, just a point of clarification, we monitor these schmoozer AOCs were identified as legacy contamination. So we are capturing really recent storm events running off there. So the water isn't old, but I don't want to say old, historical, but the actual soil, the contamination that occurred, the various types of management activities that occurred there, that's what's historical. And to be clear, this permit covers legacy sites. There is, the lab triad does monitor current sites. So they have a whole different permit that monitors current activities. That falls under an industrial outfall permit, as well as a multi-sector general permit. So they have 2 stormwater permits and construction permits that they monitor as well. Let's see. Sorry to get so far behind. Once the new compost wattles absorb metal contaminants, what happens next? So that's a great question. So we will go out and test the wattles, and if they need to be disposed of as waste, we will dispose of them as waste. So you go and determine, sample it, see what kind of levels we're talking about it, and then if they need to be put into a particular, that determines which waste stream they would go into. And then we'd reinstall. So how do the state regs compare to the PEA standards, EPA standards? I think I answered that question. So there, again, the state's trying really to adopt the EPA standards, and they feel a lot of pressure from EPA to do so. But in certain instances, they have site-specific, generally more restrictive, if I would, I should say, lower standards. Since this permit began, how many SMAs have been retired because the schmooze AOCs have been cleaned up? So that's, if there's an estimate in years or how long it will take to clean up the rest of the schmooze AOCs. Okay, so the first part, they are not technically retired or removed from the permit yet. They are in a holding pattern. So they really, the next permit, and this is something that we haven't discussed, is that the next permit cycle, it's only supposed to be a 5-year permit, but there was a few issues with the NMED and the EPA and NGOs that the last permits did not get issued. So permits in 2010 is still the current administratively continued permit that we are adhering to today. Now, that being said, we submitted an application in 2014, so it's a 5-year permit cycle. 2014, in 2015, the permit should have been issued. It was not. It got hung up for various reasons that we actually aren't privy to all of them. And so we were trying to get them to issue it. And then finally in 2019, we went to the EPA and said, can we submit a new application to get this ball rolling again? And so that's what we did. And this coming up soon, fingers crossed, it's a long process. We will be getting a new permit issued. And so they're just in a holding pattern at the moment. And when the new permit gets issued, it will be, it revamps the whole process. I actually don't know what's going to be in the final permit. So I can't really answer what's happening. But the draft permit has been issued. So is there an estimate in years on how long it will take to clean up the rest of the schmooze AOCs? That really is a question for the other groups. I don't know, Kate, do you have any idea how to address that timeline for aggregate areas?
Yeah, so Amanda just referred to our aggregate area program, and they're really responsible for investigating and, if necessary, remediating these solid waste management units in the areas of concern, which are, as Amanda explained earlier, sites associated with historical activities at the lab that have since been contaminated. So that's really a question for our soil program or our aggregate area program. I know N3B has a number of smooth and AOCs under its contract, and our contract is for 10 years through 2028. Is that right? Yes, April 2018 is when we took over the contract. So yeah, it's a 10-year contract, good through 2028. And we hope to have all of the smooth and AOCs addressed at that point.
Okay, great, thank you. And so I'll address the last question in the context of the example here that I was going to go through. So for Pete SMA 2.2, you can see there's talc-scenes. What happened? Sorry. There's talc-scenes for copper. These towels, gross alpha activity, mercury, PCB concentrations, and zinc. So these towels, just one more time, this maximum towel, which is 4.3 for copper, is protective of aquatic life. It's a water quality standard for copper, based on, copper is actually a hardness-based metal currently in the water quality regs, and the 4.3 is based on a hardness of 30, which was an average of the data across the laboratory, the hardness. So that's where that 4.3 comes from. So it is definitively protective of water quality standards, and that is, it's a maximum, so it's an acute aquatic life criteria to protect acute exposures to aquatic life. And a lot of our streams, as you might be aware, are arroyos, and so the arroyos, almost by definition, are ephemeral, so they only flow when it's raining, and some of them are intermittent. There's a handful of intermittent streams around. They're fed by springs or mountainfront recharge, so natural springs. Then there are perennial reaches, which are fed by wastewater treatment plant effluent. There's a site on the laboratory proper in Sandia Canyon. There's one in Pueblo Canyon the county has. So we have various reaches that those would have more of the chronic standards applied. And so when we get our new permit, it's actually going to, in my opinion, be a bit better, because we're going to apply the standard, the appropriate standard to the appropriate reaches. Right now, it's kind of generalized over all the lab, so it'll be, I think, more protective. So this gross alpha activity, that's that average TAL, so that's 15 picocuries per liter. We exceeded there. Like I said, we did have RAD activity, but this was a wastewater treatment plant, generally not associated with RAD activity. Most water treatment plants are associated with heavy metals. The PCB is a little bit here and there. It was in paint, is still in paint, reflective paint. And so that's a chronic level. The TAL is actually quite low to protect human health and organisms only. So that standard is for persistent chemicals, and PCBs are a persistent chemical. And we've been addressing PCB contamination since the beginning of this using the Conchner method, or the low-level method of monitoring for the past 11 years. So we've been doing a ton of monitoring and a ton of corrective actions. We have, just to get a scope of what we're doing here, we have over 2,000 BMPs or stormwater controls across the laboratory that we inspect and maintain as part of this permit. And the monitoring effort, 135 of those SMAs, so as samplers, as automated samplers. So, and we collect samples and we do our best to, and are both scientific and engineering best to determine if we have exceedances, as we do here, what we can do. And so for this particular site, we decided that a sediment detention basin was the best path forward to capture all the runoff for the most part, right? It's not a 100-year design return period. We don't want to build dams everywhere. There's other issues with that, with water rights and that sort of thing, but we want to detain as much as we can. So that was the idea, and this is what that site looks like. That's a laydown yard. Here's where the earthen berm is going to go, and this was a road down to access the site. And this is what it looked like after construction. So that green matting, right, we compact the berm, and that green matting helps to maintain that soil in place. So, so that's, yeah, so that's our berm. And if you hike in Pueblo Canyon at all, there's that that drop off is right behind you over here, and up here up here is the Sombrio. You might have seen it. Okay, here's our, oh, somebody has another question. And it is a sediment detention basin open to the elements, yes. What could be the health implications for wildlife and or humans? So that's a great question. So we, as far as the wildlife is concerned, there's a program that the laboratory triad runs. So it's an environmental surveillance program, which monitors small mammals, large game, fish in the Rio. We don't have any fish up on the plateau, and invertebrates. I mean, you name it. They have monitoring programs across the laboratory and in the Rio to monitor the health of those systems and the ecosystems and humans. Again, we use the human health organism only standard. So PCBs do attach themselves to sediment, and they settle in there. And we generally, if it fills up, so I'm going to go back for just a moment and show you. So right, so the sediment would be detained back here. So the water will infiltrate, and the sediment will be detained behind it. Generally speaking, this is a larger area, but again, going back to the size of our drainage areas, our SMAs, they're really tiny, and we don't get a whole lot of runoff coming off of those sites. So most of our locations just don't fill up with sediment. And so, but if we ever have to clean them out, for example, you might be familiar with the large weir structure, rock weir structure down in lower Los Alamos Canyon near the Y. That's the Y parking lot. So that area we clean. That's a detention basin. And there's actually 3 of them in series there, and we clean those out on a fairly regular basis as sediments accumulate. So I hope that answers your question. So that part of that process, there's actually a sediment management decision tree that's approved by NMED, and you sample, you determine how the sediment will be, where it can go, what type of waste stream it would be considered. Just for your information, that is in lower Los Alamos Canyon, and that soil and sediment accumulation there, it has been sampled numerous times over the years since it was actually installed after the Cerro Grande fire as a flood mitigation structure. And so we sample the soil, see if it exceeds certain screening levels, and then if it does not, we can apply it on the land. And there's a site just upstream of there that we apply the soil. And every clean out that we've ever done of that structure has been below those levels, where it would be considered a waste. So it is what is considered as land applicable according to the New Mexico Environment Department standards, soil screening levels. Okay, so I think I'm wrapping up here. Yeah, so we have various reporting requirements. We have an annual report due. We have compliance status reports. These are the SDIP, Site Discharge Pollution Prevention Plan. It's annual. It has absolutely everything in it that you can imagine. And all of this is online. So you can find it here at our individual permit website. So everything and anything you want to know is on this website. So it contains all of our maps of the various SMAs and stormwater control structures, sampling locations, etc. So did anybody have any more questions?
I think you got everyone in the chat, but does anyone have anything else? I think we'll just do one more because we've really used your time, Amanda. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. No worries.
It's a huge topic. It's just such a...
Sorry, I went on and on.
Well, Amanda, I do have a quick question. I'm not a scientist. I was a middle school teacher for many years, and I'm fascinated with contamination. I used to talk to my students. Okay, my question is this. I'm a layperson.
Sure.
So a lot of the graphs and stuff, I'm trying to understand, you know, especially that one where you have the little boxes and you said if the lines at the bottom of the box versus the top of the box versus the little dots on the lines. I didn't understand that really at all. So my question to you is this. Okay, so N3B has the permit to, if I understood this whole talk, is to look at storm water management is what you guys are really focused on. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
that's
given
correct.
that,
yes,
and we know, well, okay, I listened to other talks. So it seems to me in 2013 and 2012, 2013, the USGS did a study of storm runoff down in the, I believe it was the Mogollon area. And I saw a talk 2 weeks ago about that, and I was shocked. They got 18 feet of water coming through this canyon because there was a fire before, the year before, wiped out tremendous amount of trees. Then the very next year, they had a massive monsoon season, and I was shocked. 1.6 million cubic, I don't know if it was feet, yards, I don't remember the unit, of debris, soil, sediment came running through. and they show 20 feet high piles of dead trees caught 1.3 miles downstream. So my concern is with all the contamination that we know is in Los Alamos because of our war effort. I'm not criticizing that. But what I am concerned about is when I see your guys' remediation, what do you call them? Remediation options, things you're doing. I'm a little concerned that it doesn't seem like that's sufficient, but I could be totally wrong. So am I just not seeing something?
No, I think you're capturing a lot of what's happening correctly, and with New Mexico and as you said, climate change and wildfires and how the drought it's all kind of linked together. Everything's connected, right?
Yeah.
So during the Cerro Grande, a lot of the site burned. I think I don't know if you were around here at the time,
Yes.
but
Well, I was in Albuquerque, but I drove by. Yeah, it's pretty extensive.
So Los Conchas unfortunately burned maybe not the rest of it, but a whole lot. Yeah, they burned a good portion of the lab. It did not go on the lab proper.
Okay.
However, that being said, there were impacts, and the fortunate thing about the Las Conchas fire was that the areas that were burned during that fire were further upstream in the headwaters of Guaje Canyon, if you're familiar with that. It's up in upper Los Alamos Canyon, and so it wasn't, that area did not flow across the laboratory property. Some of it did, but the sites that did were not burned very badly. There's different, depending on how badly the area is burned, it's related to the debris movement. It's that whole wildfire caused, especially with pine forest, that behavior with the soil becomes water phobic with the oils from the pine forest. So you have that, and you have no vegetation, right? You've got nothing to no roots to keep things in place. So fortunately, during this Las Conchas fire, it impacted, I will say, Santa Clara much more than a lot of the laboratory areas. So I'm not saying that that's that's the remedy, but that's how that fire happened.
So is the goal?
Go ahead.
Sorry, Amanda. So I'm trying to understand. So the goal of the N3B's efforts is it to stop storm water from infiltrating through the soils, where I'm assuming there's contaminants already there, so you don't want the storm water going through there, picking up the contaminant, taking it downstream, or even into the groundwater? Is that right?
Sure. So
Okay.
so the goal of the stormwater runoff controls is to slow down the water. Well, there's a couple goals. One is to slow down the water, the stormwater runoff, because I mean, if you've ever seen an arroyo run, it can be intense and erodes. So it's to slow it down so it's not eroding.
Okay.
And the detention basins, so those are the rock check dams. So those are we use those quite a bit to slow down the water. We use them in series, several in series. So it slows down the water and allows some of the sediment to drop out behind it as it's going down. Now, the larger detention basins are for generally larger areas, larger watersheds, and the goal is to have it infiltrate. And the reason is because a lot of the contamination is attached to the sediment itself. So that's really what we're trying to capture. Now, that's not always the case, for sure. But for the most part, most of the contaminants, the heavy metals, the RADs, the PCBs do attach themselves to sediments. And so that's why the EPA, as well as state standard and stormwater control standard for so long has been these sediment control structures.
Okay.
The wattles, the slow. And you've seen, in construction, they use those spaghetti straw wattles at
Yeah.
construction sites, to protect. The sediment itself can be considered a contaminant, like not even on our site. And according to Mtds, any larger amount of sediment causing turbidity can affect fish and different types of invertebrates. So
Mhm.
so they use the same type of controls across the world.
Yeah, okay.
So
Okay, all
don't
right,
know if
thanks.
that's helping.
That gives me some help. And then,
Sure,
well,
yeah.
I know that when
absolutely.
Katrina happened and there was an idea of, and I'm thinking about those wattles. Can
Mhm.
they be populated with microbes that eat, or we don't say eat, but dissolve or break down metals?
Yeah, that's the compost. That's the idea behind the compost
So it has,
BMPs, so the wattles.
okay, so
Mhm.
it has microbes in it that get
Yep.
their energy source from the elements that make up the various contaminants. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Thank you so
yeah.
much,
And
Amanda, for
they're
answering my questions, and
sure.
Carol Ann for being
Yeah.
patient with me. I appreciate it. I'm going to mute myself now.
Great.
Complicated. So this will be, those of you who are listening, this is recorded. I should say this every time we record each of the speakers, and it's uploaded onto our website, I don't know, within a week or two. It's not like tonight. And so you can go through it again, because this is clearly one that if you didn't really get this whole thing, you might want to listen again to process this information. It's sort of like, and I'm sure she was speaking English. So I want to thank you, Amanda, so much for doing
You're
this.
welcome.
Everyone so enjoyed it, and I imagine they'll be looking at it once it gets uploaded and doing it again.
Great.
So we appreciate it
Great.
so much. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.